前裏切んのか？
いや。
Hello everyone and welcome to another deck tech video. This time we are here for our OP13 leader being added to the canon, which is going to be the yellow Bonney. Before we get too deep into it, I do have an affiliate link for TCG Player. Consider using that in the description if you are looking to buy any of these cards for your Bonney decks or for anything else. Really helps me out. All right, first up we have the leader. So this is a 5,000 power leader with 5 life and mono yellow. And her ability is your turn once per turn. This effect can be activated when you play a character with a trigger. Give up to 2 Rested Dawn cards to your leader or one of your characters. So pros to this ability compared to anything else, this is just a pretty free ability. Most yellow decks are playing a sufficient number of trigger abilities, and just getting something for free for doing something that yellow does is pretty great. She is of the Egghead and Bonney Pirates types, so all of the Egghead support from Vegapunk, as well as the upcoming starter deck that is focused on Egghead, will both work with her, which is a pretty big thing. And then being a monocolor leader, you have 5 life, and that's pretty relevant in the game right now, especially with Zoro being a prevalent option in the game. Just being able to have that extra life means you're a lot less susceptible to aggro. Cons to this one, it's a very fair leader ability. It doesn't do anything particularly broken. It's very strong, but it is ultimately pretty fair and plays the game kind of on board, which can be underwhelming if your opponent does some really broken stuff. Another con to it is trigger cards can be pretty lackluster in terms of just on the board play sometimes. So just keep that in mind. Some of your cards are just going to be out and out weaker than your opponent's cards, especially because you're not really going for synergy as much with this leader. You're going for kind of a general game plan. Very aggressive. So just keep that in mind. If your opponent overpowers you with strong plays, it's not necessarily something that's wrong with you or wrong with the deck. It's kind of nature of the yellow trigger archetypes, is you have to trade off the free value that you get out of trigger for some on the board value, and that trade-off can sometimes feel bad if you're not getting lucky with triggers or hitting triggers at the wrong times. One thing I do want to note with this leader ability is the way it's worded is intentional, so that you do not have to use it for just your first trigger. The effect can be activated piece. That activation is a cost, and you can choose to play it on a later trigger. It's going to be most relevant because there is a 1-drop searcher that has trigger. And if you had to use it right away, then you wouldn't be able to play that 1-drop searcher first, because you'd lose out on the value. So just be in mind, be aware that you don't have to do that. If I do have this one wrong, I would love for you guys to mention it down in the comments with the rules notification or rule reference. I'm going off of how a lot of other cards have been worded like this in the past, and it's very possible that I do have it wrong, but I'm pretty sure you do not have to activate this on the first thing that it does. You can choose to activate it later. So for those who are newer to my deck techs, I've got some categories that I have assigned all these cards to. There's the core, which will have this check mark on them. Those are going to be the main cards that you're going to have in your list. They're going to be more important to the deck. The tech cards with the gear, those are going to be ones that are specific to different metas, or if you want to mess around with some of the ratios, these tech cards are going to be the kinds of cards you bring in. The spicy ones are ones that are probably not the best, but they can catch your opponent particularly by surprise, or they can introduce a new way to play the deck that isn't kind of the standard and can make for some interesting decks that way. So I just wanted to call out a couple of those. And then no-goes are cards that I kind of don't think work with the deck, or they have enough downsides that I wouldn't really suggest it. and they're not the kind of downsides that are more interesting to play around that like some of the spicy cards might have. But without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into some cards. I did this roughly in reverse set order, so there's not going to be a strict order to them. But we're starting out with OP13 here, and we have this card, S-Snake. She's a 4-cost, 5,000 power with 1k counter. With on play and when attacking, you may return one card from the top of your life cards face up. Give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 2,000 power during this turn. And then she has a trigger of you may trash one card from your hand, play this card. All right, so pros to this one. Then this is going to be something that we see a lot on pros cards. The ability to play this card out from trigger is going to be really important in this deck. We are an aggro deck most of the time, and getting free attacking bodies out of life is going to be super helpful for us. So we want to, where possible, fit as many of these in. The other thing is her ability is pretty useful at getting rid of some problem characters. Some things that are maybe a little bit hard to attack into and hard for our bodies, which ultimately are pretty are lower to the ground on average than some others. That minus 2k can really help clear some problematic things, or maybe like a 10-drop Whitebeard blocker. You can bump it down to 10 without costing you necessarily anything, which just reduces its potency and it reduces that freeness that they can block with that 12k. Makes it your thresholds a little easier to get to. Cons to this one I think is probably stronger as a control card than an aggro card. The ability isn't the most useful if you're spending swings into board, unless they're swings from like a searcher or something like that. You're really missing out on pressure, which can be important at some points in the game, but on average it's not what you want. And then using up that turn the cards face up isn't 0 cost, but it's pretty low, but it's not 0. So there are a couple other cards that you might compete for that slot. So just something that I would consider a little bit more control-y rather than aggro, so it's not my first choice. But it is certainly a viable card, and it has a nice altar. Next up we have Stussy, who will be the first of the core cards that we have on here. She's a 7-cost, 7,000 power, no counter yellow character with blocker. And on play, if your leader has the egghead type, play up to one character with a cost of 5 or less with a trigger from your hand. So pros to this one. This one is nice on 7 Dawn to give you a defensive option that still gives you out a second body, still swings for 7k, and because that second body has to have trigger, it will trigger your leader ability and giving you another yet another leader ability activation, even though she herself doesn't have trigger. Cons to this one, she does not have counter, and if she does not bring another character along with her, say you're late game or you have a bunch of kind of mediocre options to play off of her, then she's not a great attacker. Still does that defense, but she's not a great attacker at that 7 cost if she does not bring a good body along with her. So those are pros and cons for that one, but this one is probably pretty solidly a core card. It's one that you could choose not to run 4 of. I'm running 4 in my starter list, but it's one you could definitely choose not to run 4 of because it's a brick and because its attacking body isn't quite as efficient as some other cards. Next up, we have the 1-cost, 2,000 power, 1k counter Lilith. This is our searcher in the deck. It's on play, look at the top 4 cards from the top of your deck, reveal up to 1 card with a trigger other than Lilith and add it to your hand, then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order, and then it has a trigger of activate this card's on play. So this is a solid searcher. It hits almost everything in the deck. As you would expect, the whole deck is going to be mostly triggers. So definitely a very solid one. Cons to it is even with your leader ability, it's not a very solid attacker. You can get there in a pinch, but only being at 2k, even after you get the 2 rested down from leader ability, you're not great getting a full attacker at that point. So just something to keep in mind. It is sometimes worth it to hold on to it and just use it as a 1k rather than play it out if you already kind of have your curve set up. Moving on to the next one, and this one's a more tech card. We have the new Bonney from OP13. It is a 5-cost, 6,000 power, 1k counter. With if this character will be removed from the field by your opponent's effect, you may turn 1 card from the top of your life cards face up instead. So this is one of the things that competes with S-Snake for that flip the top card face up thing. And then she has a trigger of draw 2 cards and trash 1 from your hand. So this body is pretty sticky, and it's got a solid trigger that getting rid of draw 2, trash 1 can be really effective in a deck that can run quite a few bricks. The cons to it, though, is if you're not in a meta where removal is particularly common, the stickiness isn't really that big of a deal, and then she just doesn't have other effects, where some of the other options that you might encounter have other effects. So definitely one to consider in removal-heavy metas, but less so, I think, when the removal is not quite as plentiful. Next up, we have, this is probably the signature card for the deck. It is the 9-cost, 10,000 power Jewelry Bonney with, on play, if your leader has the Egghead type, this character gains Rush. Then your opponent adds the top card of their life cards to their hand. And then she has a trigger, if you have 1 or less life cards, rest up to one of your opponent's characters at the cost of 7 or less. So pretty much everything about this card is great. Being only 9 costs leaves you 1 Dawn up for some evasion options. It's got triggers, so it triggers your lone leader ability. Rush and life burn, all really important things. And even the trigger, being able to rest a 7 cost or less, can be really important. There are very few cards in the that are relevant that you need to rest that go above that in a way that this trigger is going to matter. Like, you can rest nearly every blocker. The 10 cost Whitebeard is I think the most primary example, but being able to rest the more expensive of the emu blockers is really important, and being able to just take out a more middling attacker is also really powerful. Only real con I could think of for this one is she doesn't have counters, so it can be a brick. So if you do find yourself in a soft spot, it can really hurt to have too many bricks in your hand. Next up, we have Kuma. This one I have marked as just a tech card. It is a very strong card in yellow in general, but it doesn't have as much synergy here as a lot of other cards. It is a 6-cost, 7,000 power with 1k counter, and on play, you may trash 1 card from your hand, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life. Then this character gains +2 until the end of your opponent's next end phase. And then on your opponent's turn on KO, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards. So this is a very good healing body, which is just not something that this deck generally wants to do. If you're running a version that is particularly trigger body leaning, it could get a little bit more value there as just a way of still getting aggro, getting a 7k body with a 1k counter, and then potentially triggering off something out of life to get another body would be pretty effective. But him not having trigger himself means you do not get your leader ability on the turn that he comes down. And he just competes a little bit with some of the other 6 cost options. So just something to keep in mind. It's not a bad card for sure, but it's one that is kind of missing some of the synergies that other cards have for the deck. Next up, we have Zeus, who's a 2-cost, 2,000 power, 2k counter, the first one that we're going over, 2k counters, with on play, you may add 1 card from the top of your deck to your life cards, or from the top or bottom of your life cards to your hand. Wow. KO up to 1 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. So this is very efficient removal. Cons to it is it doesn't have trigger, and removal right now isn't at its strongest. The cards that you can remove out of, out of Ace, get to draw them cards. The cards that you're playing against in Emu can't be removed. So it's not at its strongest right now, and not having trigger means that you can kind of get in a spot where it's just stuck in your hand, and it's just a 2k at the end of the day, which isn't bad, but it's not very inspiring. So I have this one as a tech card because there's some other 2ks that we'll get to that I think are a little bit stronger. Next up, we have the 8-cost, 9,000 power Eustace Captain Kidd. He has no counter, and on play, you may rest this character, trash up to 1 card from the top of your opponent's life cards, and then end of turn, if your opponent has 2 or less life cards, draw 1 card and trash 1 card from your hand. So this one is great in the fact that it always will burn their life. The 8 cost does leave you enough room to play a pretty cheap trigger body potentially to still get value on that Tindon turn. And it does give you card selection, but that lack of trigger really kind of hurts your potential in a spot where you really still want to be pushing on the gas on your opponent. And I feel like a lot of times Stussy playing out another body would be more pressure than this. This one is pretty good at setting up end of the game situation though, so that is something to keep in mind. But I have it as tech card because I don't think I would want to run all 4 of it as a card without trigger, so it's not searchable by the Lilith, and without trigger means it doesn't activate leader ability. Next up, we have the 4 cost 5,000 power 1k counter Basil Hawkins. He has on KO trash up to one of your one card from the top of your opponent's life cards. And then he has trigger of draw 2 cards, trash 1 from your hand. So either your opponent will ignore him and let him stay on the board, making him an effective, continually attacking body, or he acts as a cheap way to burn a life. Both are pretty good in the deck. Cons to him, though, is it does leave that decision in your opponent's hands. So you give them the opportunity to misplay, but they also are giving them the ability to pick whichever option works best for them and what they can play around. And there are also some decks through either trashing or bottom decking or bouncing who can play around his ability entirely, making him kind of just an uninspiring body if he doesn't have the ability to burn that life. So I have him as a tech card. It's probably one that I would run, but I don't think that it is necessarily a core card that you definitely have to run. Moving on to the next one, and our first spicy option, we have the 5 cost 6,000 power 1k counter Brook. He has a trigger with if your leader has the egghead type and your opponent has 6 or more cards in their hand, your opponent trashes 2 cards from their hand. So that is a big amount of trash. Your opponents do get to pick it, which is kind of a downside to it. But trashing 2 is a major surprise factor. Your opponent really loses out on their ability to play in if they suddenly have to lose 2 cards from trash. Cons to them is he's not that great outside of his trigger. He can play him on board just fine. And there are a couple cards in the deck that when they're not at their most effective, they're effectively just 5 cost 6Ks. So it's not the worst fate. But this is definitely a card that you really want to trigger to get the most value out of it. Next up, we have another core card, which is the Nico Robin, who's a 6 cost 6,000 power 1k counter with on play, if your opponent has 3 or more life cards, trash up to 1 card from the top of your opponent's life cards. And then she has a trigger of play up to 1 yellow character with a cost of 3 or less from your hand. That life burn ability is very strong. Coming down on 6 is usually early enough to get that burn. And her trigger can be quite strong as a way to get back or get out a free body potentially, but it does require a little bit of effort to make that trigger work. Cons to this one is it's a little weak on its body for its cost, and there are a couple leaders. Emu being only a 4 life leader means that there's kind of a timer on when you want to play this card, and some other 5 life leaders, or even Ace and Blue Purple Luffy, where you may very well not get to use this ability, and you might need to just use this as a 1k, which is unfortunate. This is definitely one of the cards that if you wanted to flex out and put in some other tech card, this could be one you could shave on, but I would never build a deck with 0 copies of this because this ability is very strong and fits very well in with the aggro that we're going for in the deck. Moving on, we have a tech card here in S-Hawk. It is a 4 cost 5,000 power 1k counter with Dawn times 1. If you have less life cards than your opponent, this character cannot be KO'd by / attribute cards and gains 2,000 power. Then it has trigger. You may trash 1 card from your hand. If you have 2 or less life cards, play this card. So it can come out as a trigger body for surprise lethals, but it only comes out in late game. It is specifically strong against Zoro because oftentimes you can take from Zoro's swings and keep your own life lower than his, letting this kind of wreak havoc on their board because they can't remove it and their leader ability just doesn't do what they want it to. Cons to this one It is a lot less impressive outside of the Zoro matchups. It does swing as a 7k a lot of times, but as a 5 life leader, there are going to also be a lot of matchups where you have more life than your opponent, and then this is just a 4 cost 5k without much other value to it. So just keep that in mind. Next up, we have S Bear. It is a 3 cost 4000 power 1k counter. No abilities except it has trigger of you may trash 1 card from your hand. If you have 2 or less life cards, play this card and KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less. So it's another trigger body with a little bit of extra spice on it to clear out maybe some Kyoshiros out of Zoro or something like that. Some sort of chump blockers or some left around searchers, which can be relevant. The biggest curve, or the biggest pro to this one, is it fills your curve on 3. The deck doesn't have a ton of 3 costs, and being able to have that pressure early is pretty strong. Cons to him is he's quite unimpressive off curve, and if you don't hit a trigger at the right time. So definitely in the tech category here, but I could see if you're really trying to fine-tune your curve, this could be a card that you could consider adding in. Next up, we have probably one of the stronger of the Seraphims. We have the 5 cost 6000 power 1k counter S Snake with on play up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less other than Monkey D. Luffy cannot attack until the end of your opponent's next turn. And then her trigger is activate this card's on play effect. So both the trigger and on play are good at really stifling your opponent's ability to swing into your board, which is most important. The cons to it is it can miss things because it doesn't hit bigger than 6, and it doesn't hit Luffy. So it can miss a couple of cards. And if it is in those situations where it's a miss, it is just a 5 cost 6000 power with no other abilities. So definitely a serviceable option, but not perfect. Next up, we have a core card, at least in my opinion. It is a 5 cost 5000 power 1k counter Nami. She has on play, you may trash a card with trigger from your hand, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. Then if you have 3 or less cards in your hand, draw a card. And the trigger is activate this card's on play effect. So this is quite a strong removal option that still has that trigger, so you can play it out on 5 and still be swinging 7s with your leader, which is really quite strong. Cons to it is if the on play doesn't make sense for the matchup, your opponent has something that's too sticky, or otherwise they maybe didn't play anything on 4. It is kind of weak as far as the body goes, and so it's got a kind of cap on how effective it can be. Moving on to the next one, we have S Shark. This one is a definitely almost a spicy one, but I think in the context of the other ones, it is a worthwhile card. So it is a 4 cost 5000 power 1k counter with Dawn times 1. When attacking, your opponent cannot activate blocker during this battle. And then trigger, you may trash 1 card from your hand. If you have 2 or less life cards, play this card. So the way I see this one is this is your way of getting around, in particular in Ace, getting around their blockers in a way that can really kind of throw them off. They may go to 0 thinking, oh, I've got 3 blockers, I'll be fine. And then if you can have this set up in a spot, especially out of trigger, then you can really kind of get past your opponent's defenses thinking they were safe behind it. It's a little less effective against Emu because Emu usually is able to clear the 4 on the turn that they do it. But if you can set it up just right, particularly if you want to use maybe a Hiyori, who will go into other later as a spicy tech option, but if you want to use Hiyori to set it up as a trigger and then very carefully let it come out off of your opponent's rushing Gorosei, then you can really set up a spot where you can really get them. It's sometimes hard to get Emu 2-0, so do be aware of that limitation. Moving on to the next one, we have the Jewelry Bonney. I consider this one a core card. It is a 3 cost 4000 power 1k counter with Dawn times 1, your turn, once per turn. When a card is removed from your opponent's life cards, draw 2 cards and trash 1 from your hand. And then trigger, draw 2 cards and trash 1 from your hand. So this is a card advantage engine if you can protect it, because oftentimes you will be taking their life early, and it fills in that 3-drop slot in a pretty effective way. Cons to this one, it is a little bit smaller of a body, so it does require protection if you're going to throw away some 2Ks to protect it, or you have to slow down your aggro by not swinging with it to keep it alive. If you can keep it alive, though, this is a super strong resource, letting you get rid of bricks and kind of sculpt your hand, looking for maybe the big Bonnies. And coming out on that 3 Dawn turn is really important for kind of getting ahead in that early game. Next up, we have a tech 2K, the 1-cost 2,000 power 2K counter Usopp. He has no ability, but he does have a trigger of up to one of your egghead type leaders or characters gains 2,000 power during this until the end of your next turn. So this is a very strong trigger against maybe something like a Rayleigh, where you could give your leader plus 2k power for the whole turn, and that can really stifle Rayleigh's ability there. Cons to it is it's not that great against other decks that aren't aggro, and it doesn't really support our aggro plan. It's one of the weaker 2Ks as far as having another option to it. So not my first pick, but it is egghead searchable and such, and it can be pretty good if you're expecting a whole bunch of aggro in the format. Next up, we have Edison, who's a 4-cost 5,000 power 2K counter with on play. If you have 2 or less life cards, draw 2 cards and trash 2 from your hand, with a trigger of if your leader is big upon play this card. It's nice that it can be a card selection card late in the game, especially on a turn like maybe you've gotten down to 2 life and you play it off of a Stussy or something like that, where you still get a character who can attack, and maybe lets you find the Bonney you need for next turn. The trigger, though, is a dud, and the on-play is late game only, so there's a lot of things that make this into just a 2K most of the time. So not my top pick for a 2K for the deck. Next up, we have the 5-cost 6,000 power 1K counter Jinbei, who has no ability but has the trigger of return up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less to their hand, and then add this card to your hand. So this is a very good trigger, maybe a little less effective than a KO trigger, but it does get around some anti-KO abilities or something like that. Pretty good against maybe a Kyoshiro or other chump blocker as just a way to get rid of blockers. Cons, though, is he is usually just a 5-cost 6,000 power vanilla, which is, as we've seen, a pretty common stat line to get, and you have to kind of really want this trigger to play it. Next up, we have Frankie, who's a 4-cost 5,000 power 2K counter with no abilities but trigger, draw 1 card. Then if you have 1 or less life cards, play this card. So I think this one's pretty poor. It is a 2K that has the late game attacking trigger body. Cons to it is it only comes out late, so there are a couple times where you'll hit it early and it just doesn't do much for you. It is quite solid, though, as that late game thing, and it's definitely one of the options for 2Ks that I like better than some of the other ones, because that kind of late game, oops, I have another attacker, can be quite effective. Next up, we have the Monkey D. Luffy, who's a 5-cost 6,000 power 1K counter. With Activate Main, you may trash this character. If you have 2 or less life cards, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less, then draw 1 card. And then trigger of KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. It is nice that it is a KO trigger. 4 or less is a little less effective than it used to be, but still quite reasonable. It is a pretty reasonable attacker on curve, just like all of our other bodies, but it does still have some late game card draw and some removal abilities, which can be an upside over some of the other options. Cons is you are a 5-life leader, so it won't always be available as removal, whereas Nami will usually. So oftentimes you will find that you just have to play him out early, and then just your opponent knows that it's sitting around and they know that they can't rely on 4-cost body, but still can be a reasonable threat to kind of force your opponent to play differently. So definitely an option to play there. Next up, we have Lilith. It is a 3-cost, 5,000 power, no counter with on play. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck and reveal up to 1 card with Egghead type other than the Lilith and add it to your hand. Then put the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. And then trigger, if your leader is Vegapunk, play this card. Pros to this one, it is a searcher that finds almost everything you want in the deck. There are a couple cards that are core that you don't get to find, but it does hit almost everything. Early game curve filler like Bonney and maybe S-Spare, which are sometimes hard to come by. Cons to it, though, it is a brick, and the trigger doesn't actually do anything, so oftentimes you'll find it in life, and it kind of feels bad to just get a brick out of life that doesn't have a lot of other things. So definitely one, I have it in tech. It is definitely a strong option for your curve filling. But it's not my favorite. I think I like Bonney better as far as a 3-cost. Next up, we have the 5-cost, 6,000 power, 1k counter Roronoa Zoro with, if your leader has the Egghead type, rest up to one of your opponent's leader or character cards. So this one is kind of like a Veggie-like trigger. Just say, nope, turns over in a way that can be really effective. The downside being that he doesn't have an effective, or he doesn't have any real effect if you have to play him out from hand. So there is definitely a theme here where you have cards that if you hit them with trigger, they're great. If you don't hit them with trigger, they may be just kind of like slightly worse vanilla characters, which in this deck is not the worst because you just need to like push forward with the deck. But it can be a downside for sure. And you can't run too many of these because then if you have to just play out a bunch of vanillas, that's not really a winning strategy in the game right now. Next up, we have our first event, and this happens to be a core one. It is the 1-cost event Blaze Slice with main and counter. Up to one of your leaders or character cards gains 1,000 power during this turn. Then, if your opponent has 2 or less life cards, rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. And it has a trigger of rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. So, pros to this one, this is very cheap anti-blocker tech. It fits alongside Bonney. It is a niche defensive tech as a way to kind of stifle multiple attacks if your opponent is swinging with weak enough bodies. Big cons to it, though, is it does not trigger leader. So you do have to weave it in with other options to get the most value out of it. But I think that just with the prevalence of blockers in the format, this is a very strong one at kind of getting through. And yeah, definitely a good card for the deck. Next one I have is a more tech option. It's our next thing, which is the You're the One Who Should Disappear. It's the 0-cost yellow event. With counter, you may trash 1 card from your hand. Up to one of your leader or characters gains 3,000 power during this battle. And then trigger, if you have 0 life, you may add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to your life cards and then trash 1 card from your hand. Biggest pros to this one, when this card comes up, you will just outright win games. That trigger is the kind of thing that just, you win the game for no reason. You didn't earn it, but you played it in the deck. Also, it does get rid of bricks. The deck doesn't run too many, but especially if you wanted to run Lilith, the Searcher Lilith, the 3-drop Searcher Lilith, because there's 2 Searcher Liliths, but if you wanted to run the 3-drop one that is a brick, this could be a good card to consider adding, as it can get rid of too many bricks if you get too many of those. Cons to it is a lot of times it is just comparable to just a 2k with only a conditional upside, which is a pretty low floor to get over. If you run particularly high number of bricks, it can be worth it, but a lot of times it's just not, and especially because that trigger is very, very narrow, very strong when it hits, but very narrow nonetheless. Next up, we have the 4-cost 6,000 power 0 counter Kikunojo. This one is a core card for sure. It has on KO, if your opponent has 3 or less life cards, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards, and trigger, if your opponent has 3 or less life, play this card. This is one of our key 6k attackers that comes down on 4 Dawn. Opponents a lot of times will choose to ignore it and let you keep the 6k on board because they don't want to heal you. And even if they do attack into it, getting a free heal can be quite good. Biggest con to it is it doesn't have counter, and that triggers can sometimes not show up. and they on KO in the same sense. If your opponent is a 5 life leader and you have a little bit of difficulty early getting aggro on them, they can remove it, and then you don't get any value in a pretty effective way. That's not the most common thing. Most of the times you will be able to get your opponent to 3. It's most often as trigger that you don't get the effect, because your opponent will, if it's like the top trigger of your life, you often won't get it. Moving on to the next one, this is another spicy option. We have the 2-cost 0-power 2k counter Hiyori, who has on play you may add 1 card from the top or bottom of your life cards to your hand, and then add up to 1 card from your hand to the top of your life cards. Pros of this one, you get to control your own luck for triggers. You get to put whichever trigger you want on top of your life. You can only put it on top, so you can't set up late game triggers usually. Cons to it, though, it does not have trigger itself, and it does inherently require other cards if you find that your triggers that you have in hand just aren't that great. This is just a 2k at the end of the day, which again is a very low floor for this one. But I do think that the spice to this one, if you really design your deck around it, you can make this a very effective card, kind of getting to pick and choose when you get to play out stuff for potentially free off of triggers. Oops, I hit the wrong direction. Next up, we have Onami. I have this as another spicy one. It's a 2-cost 3,000 power 1k counter with on play up to 1 of your leader or character cards gains banished during this turn, and then trigger KO up to 1 of your opponent's characters with 5 or less. So the main things that you want to play this one is for the trigger, because that's a very strong trigger. But banish is also quite good, and it having trigger itself, it does effectively, like if you played nothing else for the turn, you would at least be giving your leader 2 Rested Dawn, which it costs here, plus banish. So a 7k banish for 2 is not the worst thing in the world. Cons to it is it's not effectively or a particularly effective body. It is at 3k, which is a kind of an important number. If you're facing up against a 5 life leader or 5k leader, you do get to use your leader ability to make this into an attacker, which is probably enough. But it is pretty niche. You really want to see this one as trigger or in context with some other good, effective attackers. If your opponent is countering early to stay at 5 life, this gets even stronger, because if your opponent counters early, then they're not going to be able to defend against the banish very well, and you can really make some effective things there. The other thing that I didn't forget to get it on the slide here, is at 2 cost, it can fill the 3-drop spot when you're going first, as just swing 8 with banish is really not that bad of a going second or going first curve, especially because on the following turn this will also get to be a 5. But at the end of the day, it is not super strong when you have to play it out. Moving on to our next 2k option, we have the 5-cost 5,000 power 2k counter Satori. He has no ability, but he does have a trigger of you may trash 1 card from your hand, play this card. Very simple trigger body, doesn't have any conditions on it, which is great. Cons to it, it's definitely not one you want to actually have to play out. You definitely want this from trigger, or just use this as 2k. So if you get stuck with these ones instead of maybe some of your other more effective 2ks, it can be kind of harmful. Next up, we have another event. This is the 2-cost event, 200 million volts Amaru, which is a main up to 1 of your leader or characters gain 3,000 power during this turn. Then, if you have 1 or less life cards, rest up to 1 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. And then it has trigger. You may trash 2 cards from your hand. Add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards. Pros to this one, this is another version of anti-blocker tech. It does give you a power boost over Blaze Slice. Blaze Slice just is neutral. This one is actually power efficient. It has a very strong trigger. It's one of those kinds of triggers that can just win you a game for no reason. Cons to it, being 2 cost makes it a lot harder to play. You can't play it, for example, on the same turn with the Rush Bonney, which is a pretty big downside to it. And the main reason I have this one as tech and Blaze Slice as core is for that very situation. But definitely an option, especially if you are expecting your opponent to try to sit behind a blocker with maybe events. That extra 1k can also make a difference in pushing through events on top of those blockers. So definitely an option. Next up, we have the original Cheese Lord on a 2k. This is Kaponging Beige. He's a 3-cost, 3,000 power, 2k counter with no abilities, but he has trigger of up to one of your opponent's leaders or characters cannot attack during this turn. You will win games with this one. It's really hard to both suggest running it and suggest not running it. It is very, very strong when it hits. When it doesn't hit, it's very, very baseline. It's just a very, very swingy card. But the raw power of it is really hard to ignore. You will win games off of this one. In the games where it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, it's still a 2k, which is not a high floor, but it's still a very playable card. It's just a 2k. Next up, we have a pretty spicy one here. This is the Sanji from OP04. He's a 4th cost, 5,000 power, 1k counter with blocker and a trigger. You may trash one card from your hand, play this card. Kind of similar to how Beji works. You can win games off of this one just by having a surprise blocker. It's not as trivial to win this one with this one because you do have to also trash the card, and blockers can be interacted with, whereas Beji's ability kind of just says nope, turn over. Cons of this one, he is kind of just a mediocre attacker if you ever have to play him out, but more effective than some other cards, I would say. So definitely one that you could very defensively put in a deck, but it is missing a lot of the little synergies that some of the other cards have, so I have it just as a spicy option. In that same vein of trigger bodies, we have 3 different ones here. These are all from OP03. They all have the same trigger ability of you may trash one card from your hand to play this one. First, we have Cracker, who conditionally has double attack if you have less life than your opponent. We have Smoothie, who can get plus 2,000 power by taking a card from the top of your life and putting it into your hand. And then we have Parasparrow, whose ability is the least relevant of them, but he is a 3-cost, no counter. So potentially fits in as your early game plays, but his on KO lets you look at the top 3 for another Big Mom and Pirates cards. I would say that if you're playing Parasparrow, you kind of have to play the other 2 at least. The other 2 are more defensible on their own. The issue with all 3 of these, though, is these are effects that ultimately don't really stand up to modern card designs, and ultimately they're not super strong, all just being at 5Ks. You won't get laughed out of the room playing any of these because they are all very defensible cards to play, but you're definitely not going to get crazy value out of them. Sometimes they'll be exactly the cards you want, but oftentimes they're just going to be replaceable with all the other cards in your deck. Next up, we have from PRB. This is another core card. This is the 5-cost, 7,000 power, 0 counter, Boa Hancock. She has on play, you may trash a card with a trigger from your hand. Up to one of your opponent's rested leaders or characters other than Monkey D. Luffy cannot attack until the end of your opponent's next turn. And then trigger, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. So the biggest thing is this can freeze the Zoro leader, which is really big, or it could maybe freeze a big attacker out of Ace. Less effective against Imu because he's going to be refreshing all of his bodies. And then after that freeze, he's also just a 5-cost, 7,000 power, which is definitely high on the power curve for that 5-cost. Cons to it, it does not have counter. And if you are using that freeze ability, you are going to have to trade a card for it, which can kind of come back to bite you late. Because the freeze is not a permanent way of dealing with something, you can get in situations where you freeze something and you save a card for that turn, but the thing that they're swinging with will just swing on a future turn. So it's not getting it's not dealing with the problem. It's only kind of forestalling it. But still very strong in the deck. Because it has no counter, you could consider not running this Sephora, even though it's a core card, but I would definitely bring at least some number of copies, specifically for dealing with Zoro, to prevent them from being able to really mess with you and go for the game at an inopportune time. Next up, we have the Otama. She is a 2-cost, 0-power, 2k counter. With Activate Main, you may rest this character and add 1 card from the top of your life cards to your hand, top or bottom of your life cards to your hand, and then up to one of your leader or characters gains 3,000 power during this turn. And she also has a trigger of rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. Biggest pros to this one is, at minimum, she represents 5k worth of power if you want to play and use her on the same turn. Because she will trigger your leader ability, gets you 2k off of their things, plus the 3k off of the ability. That's a lot of power to get out of nowhere. It is one of the cards that's quite good if you were playing the 8-drop Kid as a way of use Kid, burn their life, play Otama, burn your own life, get 5,000 on your leader, so you get to, no questions asked, burn a life, and you get to swing for 10, which is quite strong. She's a 2k, which is a great floor. And then because it rests itself and doesn't trash itself, your opponents are really incentivized to swing into this. It's super easy for them to get off the field, but if they don't have any searchers or anything that they've played out early, this is just a kind of a great card for forcing their leader to swing into it. Cons to it is mostly just a 2k, because a lot of times you won't have the luxury of taking a life to go for game with this one. So a lot of times it will just be a 2k, but that's still a pretty good floor. As far as cards not to play, I put Shaka here, but this really represents all of the non-Lilith scientists from Egghead. So all of them represented together are usually 5-cost or 4-cost 6ks and 5ks. I would probably say not to play any of them because their trigger doesn't do anything. A lot of times they end up not being effective attackers over some of our other options, just because their worst case is just vanillas with triggers that don't do anything. The other con to them is a lot of their abilities don't work unless you are on low life. They're really designed to work with Vegapunk, who starts with 2 life, and so that they're designed to work very well in that deck. And we're a 5-life leader. It takes us a while to get down to 2 life, and definitely they're not free to play. So in general with these, I would not recommend playing them. If you do want to play them, you have to kind of play them all and then really play the EVO2 Vegapunk to go with it. But in general, I would not recommend it for the Bonney leader. It may be true that you want to play them in the Luffy leader coming in the future, but at least for now, for this Egghead leader, I would not recommend it. Next up, we have one of the promos. This is the 5-cost 6,000 power 1k counter. With end of your turn, you may turn 1 card from the top of your life cards face up, set up to one of your Egghead type characters as active. So this is pretty good at protecting your other attackers, and it is one of the things that competes with S-Snake, that first S-Snake for that flip your top card of your life face up. And then it also has a trigger of draw 1 card and KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 2 or less. It's probably not going to come up terribly often, but it will get rid of an occasional chump blocker. I think the main thing to pay attention with this one is how it compares maybe to the Rocket Luffy, same outfit, the trash to KO4. That would be the card I would most compare this to, or maybe to S-Snake as one of your 5-cost 6Ks. So definitely valuable to play because protecting your bodies is pretty important in these aggro decks. One of the downsides, though, is this one doesn't come out to December, so pay attention to that. Moving on to the next one. This is an older promo. This is the 4-cost 5,000 power 1k counter Roronoa Zoro, who has no abilities but has trigger KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. So pretty strong KO trigger. It is on the even cost, so it fits if you wanted to maybe look at Hawkins or Kikunojo and you wanted an alternative. This could be pretty reasonable to play in those slots as well, just to up your trigger count. And it's got some interesting types. This is a not uncommon type line, because most of the Land of Wano art Straw Hats don't have the Land of Wano type. So it's just an interesting one. All right, so here is the list. Now that we've gone over all those cards, here is where I would start for the list. This is going to be all 4s and a 2 of, just because we're starting with a starter list. If you wanted to include some of the tech cards, the cards I would encourage you to start shaving from would be the Boa, the Robin, and the Stussy. These are the cards that are most situational. They're a little bit higher up on the curve, or cost you cards in hand, or something to that matter. So those are the first ones that I would include some shaving on. I would keep them in the deck, but these are the cards that have enough downsides to maybe shave to fit in some more 3s and 4s, just as ways to kind of fill out your curve. If Nami is particularly bad, make sure, or like if removal in general is particularly bad, you can also choose to remove the Nami. If you were doing that, I would probably consider running the S-Snake in this slot as a similar cost, a little bit higher power, and because the freeze ability is a little stronger, if removal is going to be poor, then the freeze is probably going to be okay. Kikunojo is a brick. You could consider shaving some on that. Make sure when you're building your deck, you make sure to pay attention to your costs. You want to have at least 4 3-ofs, probably 2 different 4K bodies. I have Kikunojo and Hawkins here. I don't really count Frankie. At least 2 5s, and then some number of Robins, Stussys, definitely 4 of Bonnies, at least 2 of the Resters, and then I like having 3 different 4-ofs for 2Ks. You can mix around with the numbers here. I don't think you need to have 4 of all 4 of these. You could definitely like mess around with your ratios on what you want for your 2Ks. As far as playing the game, you really want to play as close to on curve as you can. A lot of times, weaving in the Liliths if you need to play off curve, or just adding an extra Dawn to leader. You want to really be punishing their life. Don't go at their board too much, favoring freezing it and just keep going at life when you can. And then the other thing that I would recommend is for Lilith, don't always just play this out if you don't have something that you're directly looking for. Like if you're going second and you already have a 4 and a 6, then you can consider not playing this out until later in the game to play it alongside Stussy as a card to help you find maybe extra copies of Bonney, or if you need to find another Blaze Slice, or if you have a 3-drop, you can play it on 2 going second with 3 and a 4. So just consider not playing it out unambiguously on that first turn, just so that you have the most information possible when you go searching. Because oftentimes if you search early, you may end up drawing the you might have drawn the card when you didn't have to swing with it. The difference between a 7 and an 8 in an early game situation is not significant, so if you can wait an extra turn, that can be pretty good. But this is kind of where I was at, and I hope you guys enjoyed kind of chatting through all these cards with me. Thanks again for hanging out, and I hope you guys enjoy these videos. I will be playing it this week, so watch for that, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.